Serious, what's the creepiest thing you've seen while driving at night? Somebody had set up a cardboard standee in the middle of nowhere road. I thought I almost hit somebody standing in the pitch black. It took me a few minutes to regain composure and realize it was a standee of Arnold Schwarzenegger. Driving in the backwoods in northern GA heading home. Moon is out, but this country bus road had no street lights, so basically my headlights are it. I can see silhouettes of things on the side of the road ahead of me. This massive shape comes out from behind a tree and begins squirming along the side of the road up ahead. I slow down and ponder if I wanna go forward anymore because, while I had no idea what it is, I do know it's large. Looks about as tall as my car, and just as long, and I thought I saw spikes on its back, and it's moving weird. I decide screw it and begin slowly going forward. I'm in a car. It can handle anything the state of GA can throw at it. Get closer to the thing and notice it's undulating funny. Turn ever so slightly to hit it with my headlights. It was a deer trying to hump another deer and I guess not quite getting in there. I didn't stop laughing until I got home because I was sure for a moment I was gonna be attacked by some ancient, unspeakable demon. LMAO, that's actually hilarious. That deer was probably you interrupted him since the chances of you being there were slim to none. Driving on a back road near Brookville, Indiana, and as I was passing a cornfield, I saw something leaning out of the corn onto the side of the road. As I got closer I realized it was a scarecrow. I drove past it as quickly as possible. Got married in Indiana last month. Had to drive up from GA. Passed through the scenic Route 1. Your paranoia was not out of place. I was driving home from work through an industrial area, quite late. As I came to a traffic circle, there was a car parked sideways across the road in an attempt to block the road. Two guys were standing near the car, waiting for someone to stop. I think the idea was to hijack the person, but I floored it and drove straight over the traffic circle to get away. Rattled me for a few days. A baby stroller on the side of the road. Almost stopped to check it out but was rushing home. A week later I read that some people would leave strollers out in the open to trick passerbys to stop and then rob them. Not sure if the one I saw was an actual abandoned stroller or if it was some elaborate plan to rob me. I was driving to see a supposedly haunted house in the middle of the woods when I saw two figures in black hooded gowns. I noped the frick out of there as fast as I could. Probably two teenagers having a sesh. Driving on a rural road in Indiana heading to work at 4 in the morning. Cornfields on either side of me. A man came out of the fields covered in blood. I freaked out and sped around him. Called the police. Turns out he crashed into the field and wandered out. Yeah, rural Indiana can be creepy as frick. My father-in-law lives out in the boonies, and some of the noises you hear are just strange. I was driving down a back road at night. Forest on either side of the road and it was really foggy with no moon. A large creature staggered out of the woods and into the road ahead of me, moving in a really jerky and awkward way. My heart starts pounding because I have no idea what that creature is and I inched my car closer it. Then I realized it was a deer missing a front leg. It was an old wound and looked to be healed over. The deer continued its silent hill-like ambling across the road and into the woods on the other side of the road. I continued to see that deer off and on for a couple months and laughed every time because of how much it scared me that first time. I think even the hunters left it alone because it was kind of awesome to see a 3-legged deer survive that long. Long live James the 3-legged deer. I think it was a doe, but I named it James anyway. I recently learned that most hunters will let abnormal deer live, such as albinos and Mr. James. He probably died of old age or those darn coyotes. I work nights and one day I forgot my lunch at home. I didn't have money to spend so I decided to go home on my lunch hour and eat my sandwich on the way back. I was in a hurry so I took the back roads. At about halfway there as I was speeding and noticed a woman in a white night dress without shoes standing in the road in the other lane. I slowed down as I passed her thinking she was probably drunk and didn't want her to jump out in front of me or anything like that. It wasn't till later as I was on my way back that I started to think how odd it was. Why would someone be in the middle of the road in their bare feet at 2:30 AM? But I just reassure myself that the woman was probably just drunk. That's a straight up woman in white. Nope. Driving at night while camping. There are no street lights. and all I see are hundreds of eyes staring back at me in the darkness. There were possibly hundreds of bullfrogs where we were camping. It's quite creepy when their eyes get reflected in the headlights' flashlights. That reminds me of that story where the hunter got caught in rain and stayed in a cabin for a night, with all these pictures on the wall of people staring directly at the bed, and it turns out in the morning the place has no pictures, only windows. Lenoir City, Tennessee. About 5 years ago on a highway next to a sausage plant, driving home at about 2 AM from a friend's house. No lights on the highway. I hit a long downslope section of the highway and start to see something in the distance. I get up close and crap my pants. There is a woman in a dress directly in front of me, absolutely hauling butt down this hill in roller skates, freaking backwards. No fricks given about where she was going. It was absolutely pitch black out, and when I passed her she didn't even acknowledge me. To this day I have no freaking clue what was going on. That's some serious skill. Used to work second shift, got off around 11:30 one night. Drove over to my girlfriend's house and stayed there for a few hours. A pretty bad thunderstorm starts up and I decide to head home. My dog hates storms, didn't want to leave her alone. There's 2 ways back to my house from hers. One runs through town and takes 20 minutes or so. One is a single lane dirt road and only takes about 8 minutes. This night I chose the dirt road. There are 0 houses on this dirt road for about an 8-mile stretch. It's raining hard as heck. I'm in the middle of the Alabama backwoods creeping down this dirt road. I come around a curve and there is a very large man standing right in the middle of the road, wearing a black hoodie with his hood up, dark colored pants, and dark shoes. I slammed on the brakes and stopped. He takes a few steps towards my truck, and I freaked out and threw my truck into reverse, backed up, and he runs towards me and then darts into the woods. Due to being in the middle of nowhere I didn't have cell reception, so as soon as I got home I called the cops and reported it. 2 nights later a woman had a similar experience. He actually tried to get into her car. Police searched the woods several times and found a camp but never found the guy. This one time I was driving home from a night class and hit a deer on a road about a mile away from home. The thing went flying and fell in a ditch on the side of the road. I immediately pulled over and grabbed a flashlight to see if the deer was okay. I'm not sure how it managed to get away without me noticing, but it was gone as soon as I was out of the car. I looked around for a bit to see if I could find it and determine if I needed to get someone to put it down or if it would be fit to let go. This wasn't the first deer I've hit. What was kinda creepy though, after looking around I was completely surrounded by deer on both sides of the road, all of whom were just staring at me, completely frozen and silent, like they were judging me. The ghosts of the dead gather to welcome their new brother. Drove around some back roads to clear my head, pulled over and stopped, decided to kill my lights and lean back. 5 minutes pass, I pop my seat back up, and there was an SUV parked behind me that wasn't there before. No one was in the driver's seat. I didn't see lights coming up the road when I was parked. Tried starting the car and it struggled. It finally started on the 3rd try. Drove away. Nothing happened. But I watched too many movies to not fabricate a cliche what if horror scenario in my head. Driving back home from work through the countryside, my headlights passed over a corner of a hilly field and lit up a sea of about 20 plus pairs of eyes staring back at me from the pitch dark. Headlights also quickly revealed they were actually just deer, but for a minute there, geez. My brother and I were driving back from a festival. He was driving and he hit a guardrail and we were pretty shocked from the experience but alive and in one piece. I took the wheel from him and I don't know what it was, but I kept seeing foggy people, foggy greyish purple shade things, in the fields next to the highway the entire drive home, 2 hours-ish. I also kept having the feeling someone was sitting in the backseat, but when I looked in my rearview mirror obviously no one was there. This all happened way past midnight. The weird thing was, a few days later I told my brother and he told me he saw the foggy people too, and he also had a feeling someone was sitting in the backseat. Still creeps me out thinking about it. You should definitely both check your backseats again. This one time I was driving my brother a town over, roughly 15 km. I started seeing the same white Honda Civic parked on the side of the road, and I mean exactly the same. I thought nothing of it because it's a pretty common car, but was a little confused that they were all white and I'd never seen them before. After I had passed the 7th one I was starting to think it was my tiredness getting to me, and I was about 5 km away from home when I saw brake lights in the distance and I was gaining on them fast. I knew I couldn't have been going over 100. I have a Fiat Tipo and the speedo is electric and glitches sometimes. And as I got closer my suspicions were confirmed. It was a car stopped in the middle of the road. And it was in fact a white Civic. And if my life was a horror movie I made the worst choice ever and I got out to check on the driver. No driver, the car was running and there was no house in sight and no one for miles. I had a good look around and I couldn't see anyone, it was just me and the two cars. It was a nice Civic too, there was nothing in the car and it looked really clean. Anyway, I stayed for about 10 minutes hoping the driver would show up and give me some answers, but nope, 10 minutes later it's just nothing but crickets and car engines, so I left and never saw the Civics down that road again, and to this day if I see one it kinda freaks me out. So you are haunted by white Honda Civics. A dude humping his car vigorously with his pants down. I don't know if that was more creepy or funny, but the dude was going to work. Poor car. Bet he was freaking exhausted. Driving to my so's house, I went down a regular street and as I'm going around a roundabout, a guy popped out of the plants in the middle of it wearing nothing but a torn loincloth, body covered in tribal paint and wielding a boomerang. He looked at me dead straight in the eyes as my headlights shone on him. Freaking floored it. And the really odd bit was that it was in rural Alabama. Driving through a bad neighborhood at night, I see a man wearing a black tee and cap holding his stomach and staggering in pain, walking in and out of the road, and I notice that there is blood. At this time I'm 17 and 100-pound girl, so I'm scared to pull over for myself, but I do it anyway. I keep my door open and chase him down. He has been stabbed twice in the stomach, and his face is beat purple. I have him sit by my car, call police, and wait for them to arrive. I was worried that the person who did this was still after him and really had to keep my watch while telling him to hold his wounds as tight as he can. Luckily, the cops came, and I left. Not sure what happened to the man after that. You are brave and wonderful for doing that. A huge owl swooped down out of a tree that hung over the road in my so's neighborhood. Had about a 5-foot wingspan and eyes that were reflecting my headlights. It came about a foot away from my windshield before gliding over me. This happened around 20 years ago, in Johannesburg, South Africa, where I grew up. I was driving back very late from a night out at a club. I'd had a couple of beers. Stupid, I know, and, wanting to avoid the main roads, I took a detour down a very quiet and winding back road that bypassed the main road and popped out near my house. Would take a bit longer but much less chance of the cops stopping me. This was about 4 AM. Absolutely nobody on that road at the time. Going pretty slowly, I rounded a sharp left bend in the road, and as I did I saw a woman, clearly of black African descent but with the most remarkable albino coloring, alabaster white skin and hair. She was standing on the verge of the road staring directly in the direction where I was coming from. She was dressed in nothing but a flimsy white skirt, no top, no brassiere, bare breasts, barefoot. She was grinning, not just a smile, a manic, horrifying grin showing all her teeth, and as I slowly passed her we locked eyes. As we did, I noticed she was holding a small knife, like a builder's Stanley box cutter, and her hands and wrists were covered in blood. I absolutely crapped myself, nearly lost control of the car, and as soon as I had passed her I sped up. I could still see her in the rear view mirror, looking at me and starting to walk into the middle of the road following in the direction I was driving. I spent a few seconds driving away as fast as I could, watching her in the mirror the whole time, and all I could think was, oh my god, what the absolute frick is that? Then I rounded the next bend and lost sight of her. I got home, about 10 minutes later, absolutely shaking with fear and in a near panic. After a couple minutes at home, I calmed down a bit and then started worrying that something terrible had happened to her, and that she needed help. There was no way I was going back out, so I called the local police station and told them there was a near naked woman on the road that was hurt, potentially armed, and needed help. They asked my name and I hung up on them. I used to dream about her for months after that. I still wonder to this day who she was and what had happened to her. I can rationalize it now, and most likely she was someone with a mental illness or suffering a psychotic episode and had self-harmed. A part of me wishes I'd stopped to try help her myself, but the honest answer is, the experience terrified me to my core and my only thought at the time was to flee. I had just seen a midnight showing at the cinema with my 2 friends and the car park was almost empty. We get into my car, start up, and a car pulls up and parks in the space next to me. I look over and there's a guy staring directly into my car at me, and he just had a really creepy look about him. I motioned with my hand to him to see if he wanted anything, but he continued to stare without responding. We started getting freaked out at this point, bearing in mind it was almost 3 AM and we were in an almost empty car park. I decided just to drive off, but as soon as I went he began to follow. He followed me all the way out of the car park, out of the junction, and all the way up to a roundabout. Determined to lose this creep, I went around the roundabout a few times and finally managed to get away. He may have just wanted directions or something, but staring at 3 girls in a dark car park and following them sure is a weird way to go about asking. Cruising through Oklahoma about 80 miles per hour. Late night. Hadn't seen another car for what seemed like forever and just zoning out to some soft music when it happened. The most surreal experience. Initial thought was confusion and panic. Hundreds of comets shooting up towards the sky. Completely alien-like, too, with an unusual glowing hue. The trailing tails of light fading as the projectiles shot up and seemingly overhead. Then my perspective and reasoning skills kicked in and scale was determined. These were not way off in the distance shooting towards the heavens. These were on my windshield and being pushed upwards by the wind. I had driven into a massive swarm of lightning bugs. As they smacked the windshield by the hundreds, their guts were smearing across the glass. Bioluminescence activated by the traumatic impacts was covering my windshield. It was unlike anything I had ever seen before or since. I reluctantly hit the wipers as I knew this was a once-in-a-lifetime moment. But again, I was doing 80 miles per hour down a dark, deserted highway in the middle of nowhere. My wipers were fairly new, so they did a perfect and clean wipe. With a clear windshield but still glowing edges, I pulled over to examine the carnage. I was able to explain the phenomenon, thus calming my nerves and return to my zoned out drive. This probably isn't that scary unless you happen to be there and happen to be a wimp like me, but it still freaks me out a little, so I'll write it out. My buddy and I got out of a movie around 1 or 2 AM. in a part of town we weren't really familiar with, and as we were leaving we got kind of turned around, but we figured we were close to the highway and would find it either way. Well, we were wrong apparently, because we kept heading in one direction until the sound of the highway completely disappeared and it just kept getting darker and darker and quieter. Like, I'm sure it was just our imagination, but it honestly looked like it was getting continuously harder to see, even though it was already dead of night with no street lamps and our headlights were on. And we were still within city limits, but everything just kept getting more and more frosty looking the further we drove. This is all within a few minutes, mind you. Eventually we were just looking for a good place to turn around, but it took us forever to find it. Eventually we did manage to turn around and find our way back to the highway, but not before experiencing this weird, primal, psychological horror that we were going to get sucked into the abyss or whatever. Anyway, that's all that came of it. Like I said, we're wimps. We were going camping with some of my girlfriend's friends over the summer, but stupidly we hadn't booked a spot at a campsite and it took longer to get there than we expected. Anyway, we were stupid kids, so we were herring down these narrow lanes in the pitch black, not really caring what was happening because there was no one else on the road at that time of night and in the middle of nowhere. So we crested a blind hill going much too fast and came bumper to face with a huge stag standing stock still in the middle of the road. The guy driving hit the brakes hard and we skidded to a halt, and we literally booped the stag in the side as he backed up. We all sat in silence, gripping the dashboard seat in front and breathing heavily. This stag just lets out a burst of air from its nostrils and runs into the bushes. My girlfriend, while we were visiting her hometown, wanted to drive by a cemetery where they buried women accused of being witches and others. You could tell who the witches were by the fortress of iron surrounding their graves. We had her parents' dog in the backseat asleep. We played that dog into the ground prior. She claimed that there was a point where the nicely paved road meets the old broken gravel Y road, where you feel a faint disturbance, discomfort, anxiety. Sure enough, as soon as we hit that exact point, the pooch immediately wakes up and starts crying unusually loud. Pret I creep I. Fortress of iron surrounding their graves. That's not what these are for. They are put in place to prevent grave robbers. Their job is to prevent something getting to the grave, not preventing things from coming out. Honestly, just fog. Driving through the night is the scariest already, and unbounding fog in the middle of the forest then crossing over a bridge. Major the missed flashbacks. Fog and driving equals majorly creepy. Okay, that's not really creepy, but every time I drive home from my GF's house there's a tree trunk covered in leaves that at night totally looks like some kind of cow or goat that's about to throw itself onto the road. Nighttime lightning that, for a split second, makes daylight, and in that second a vague yet grimacing face figure stares from a distance. But this was in rural Ontario, shortly after seeing Paranormal Activity in theaters. Two dilapidated mannequins with crudely painted on smiling facing being used as scarecrows in front of a field way out in the middle of nowhere. I screamed and nearly made the person driving crash. I was in France with family and I was really young, so the memory may be a little distorted, but this is what it seemed like at the time. We were going through some country roads past fields and stuff and went past a line of hooded people walking in single file, all chained up in handcuffs. I assume now it was just some people dressed up, or maybe filming something, but it was creepy as heck at the time. A body laying on the ground. No joke. I turned around and drove past again to make sure I was seeing it right. Sure enough, still there. I called the police and waited just down the road. Luckily, it turned out to be a drunk man that had crashed his bike and passed out on his way home. I was freaking out the whole time I waited for them. Being at a stoplight downtown at 2 AM, and homeless people walk up to your window and tapping on it trying to get your attention and you have to just act like you don't see them, happens a lot around here. Does stopping to pee count? I was on a quiet stretch so I got out to pee and stretch my legs and a coyote walked right in front of the car while staring at me. I pulled over to stop and let my friend out as we were by her house pretty much in the middle of nowhere. A man came up to the car and opened the door and tried to get in. Luckily the engine was still running and we drove the heck out of there. Hate to think what could have happened to two girls. A few times late at night, I've come across people driving on the wrong side of the freeway, which of itself isn't creepy per se, but now it's a bit of a phobia and my brain sees every pair of lights around a bend in the freeway as being on the wrong side. Another time, I stopped to get petrol at a 24-hour service station late at night, was standing away daydreaming as I was filling up, saw motion at the corner of my eye and saw this enormous spider, about the size of my palm, casually come up from the wheel arch, wander over the car and hang out on the driver's door handle. Freaked me the heck out because I'm badly arachnophobic, and that type of spider usually comes in pairs. Spent the rest of the drive waiting to feel the other one start crawling over me. You must live in Australia. I was driving home late one night, somewhere between 1 and 3 AM. The stretch of road I was driving goes through the back end of a couple of counties in the deep south. Nothing around but forests, fields, and the occasional group of shacks huddling under a light that only barely keeps away the night. I'd driven this stretch of road many times before, even at this time of night, so it wasn't really a big deal, just a long trip, since there was rarely any traffic that time of night. During the day you could always count on at least a handful of cars somewhere around. I was able to turn the stereo up and push the pedal down, and then I came to this bridge. Nothing really noteworthy about it. It's not ancient or a covered bridge or all that spooky. It's just a concrete span over swampland. Trees growing right up near the edge and turning the road into a dim trail at the bottom of a dark canyon. I'd been over this bridge many times before and aside from being fairly long, it wasn't really noteworthy until that night. It was humid out and as the temperature dropped there was a little bit of fog. Not enough to really slow me down, but I had to turn off the high beams. So I'm shooting across the bridge and it hits me that it seems to be taking longer than normal to get across it. Maybe I was just tired, maybe my mind was playing tricks on me, and then I thought I was finally getting to the end of it. I saw a figure walking on the opposite side of the road. At first, no big deal, right? Guy walking in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the night. Probably lives nearby, probably drunk. Watch them to make sure they don't fall in front of the car. But my mind is already racing. I mean, this is the middle of nowhere. There are no houses around. There are no lights but the stars and my headlights stabbing out at the darkness. And as I whiz by going way too fast for my own good, I notice two things. First, the figure is wearing what appears to be a straitjacket, the sleeves undone, and the straps trailing to the ground, glaring white against the background of the night. No mistaking it, a straitjacket, hands covered, straps dangling and waving as he walked. Second, it has no face. Not like, there's no head there, there's a head shape, and the place where a face should be, but no face. Just an expanse of darkness that I took to be his skin. I chalked it up to going really fast, contrast between white jacket and dark skin at night, and thinking creepy thoughts. I mean, surely I couldn't have just seen that. I tried to spot him in my rear view mirror, but it was so dark there was nothing to be seen. I slowed down a little, and was suddenly off the end of the bridge and on normal 2-lane blacktop again. I briefly considered turning around, seeing what it was. Surely it was just a trick of the light or my mind playing tricks on me, right? But I still remember being my heart pounding in fear as I sped on through the darkness, driving home. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.